A linguist sits at a wooden table in the late 1990s, staring at two open books under the hum of a low desk lamp. On his left is a comprehensive dictionary of the ancient Sumerian language, a tongue spoken in the deserts of the Middle East more than 5,000 years ago. On his right is a glossary of the Hopi language, spoken by the indigenous people of the high deserts of northern Arizona. They are two cultures separated by a vast ocean, by continents, and by thousands of years of recorded time. By every rule of mainstream history, these two peoples should never have met, never have spoken, and never have shared a single idea. And yet, the man traces his finger down the page of the Sumerian text to the word for the sky gods, the beings who came from the heavens to engineer humanity. The word is Anunnaki. He then moves his finger to the Hopi glossary. In the language of the American Southwest, the word for ant is Anu, and the word for friend is Naki. Anunnaki, the ant friends, the beings who, according to Hopi oral tradition, brought humanity deep underground to save them from a global cataclysm initiated by the sky. This is the exact point where a simple historical curiosity fractures into one of the most profound puzzles of the ancient world. How does an isolated tribe in the American Southwest share precise linguistic roots, creation myths, and highly advanced astronomical knowledge with the very first recorded civilization of ancient Mesopotamia? You are about to look at a mystery that forces us to question the entire timeline of human knowledge. We are going to examine what the indigenous elders of the Hopi maintained long before anyone asked them, what the clay tablets of Sumer actually say, what happens when you map their ancient cities against the stars, and why the conventional explanation of simple coincidence begins to break down when you look closely at the math. This is a journey into the memory of the Earth itself. To understand the weight of what we are dealing with, you have to first step into the world of the Hopi. Imagine you are standing on the edge of Black Mesa in the harsh, wind-scoured landscape of northern Arizona. The air is thin and dry. The horizon stretches out in a vast, uninterrupted line of red rock and scrub brush. For over 1,000 years, the Hopi people have lived in this exact region, building their villages, known as pueblos, on top of three prominent rocky outcroppings named First Mesa, Second Mesa, and Third Mesa. To the untrained eye of the early European explorers who arrived here, this seemed like a desolate, almost arbitrary place to build a civilization. They saw a simple people surviving in a brutal environment, but they were not looking at the ground, and they certainly were not looking at the sky. The Hopi did not choose this landscape by accident. Long before any modern surveyor mapped this territory, the people who settled here carried with them an incredibly dense, structured body of knowledge. We often make the mistake of viewing indigenous oral tradition as mere folklore, imagining it like a childhood game of telephone where the message degrades with every passing generation. But that is fundamentally wrong. For the Hopi, oral tradition was a rigorous, highly disciplined mechanism of historical preservation. The stories were memorized exactly, word for word, gesture for gesture, guarded by elders whose sole responsibility was to ensure that not a single syllable of the memory was altered. To them, this was not a collection of campfire legends. It was a survival manual. It was history, kept alive by voice for generations. And that history tells a very specific story about the origins of humanity. According to the Hopi creation tradition, we are currently living in the fourth world. The previous three worlds were destroyed by the Creator because humanity fell out of balance with nature. The first world was destroyed by fire, the second world was destroyed by ice, and the third world was destroyed by a massive, all-encompassing flood. But during each of these cataclysms, the purest members of humanity were saved. They were guided by a star, and they were led deep underground by a mysterious group of beings they called the Anu-Sinum, or the Ant People. These beings provided food, taught them how to survive in the dark, and waited for the earth above to stabilize. To honor this salvation, the Hopi designed their entire civilization around the sky. They built underground ceremonial chambers called kivas, which they entered through a small hole in the roof, symbolizing the emergence from the underground world of the ant people. But more importantly, they aligned their settlements with the stars. If you take an aerial map of the three main Hopi mesas and lay it over a map of the night sky, you will find that the mesas perfectly mirror the alignment of the three stars in the belt of Orion. And it is not just a rough approximation. The physical distance and the angles between the villages on those mesas reflect the exact spatial relationship of those three specific stars. They built a terrestrial map of a constellation without the use of aerial surveying, without compasses, and without written mathematics. This kind of immense, deliberate engineering demands a level of knowledge that does not simply appear out of nowhere. It requires centuries of continuous, uninterrupted observation of the heavens. It requires an understanding of celestial mechanics, and it requires a reason. If you enjoy stories the history books quietly skipped, consider subscribing because this channel lives on them. We are going to look at what the written record of an entirely different continent says about this exact same story, at the physical evidence of ancient star mapping, at why the official academic version struggles to explain the overlap, and at what the people who held these secrets believed was coming next. Because thousands of miles away, and thousands of years earlier, a completely different group of people arrived at the exact same conclusions. And what they recorded should not have matched the Hopi legend at all. It did. Now shift your perspective across the globe to the scorching, flat plains of modern-day Iraq, between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Here, more than 5,000 years ago, the Sumerian civilization seemingly erupted out of the Stone Age. They are credited by mainstream historians as the inventors of writing, the wheel, agriculture, complex mathematics, and the division of time into 60 seconds and 60 minutes. And unlike the Hopi, the Sumerians wrote everything down. They recorded their history, their merchant receipts, and their creation myths on tens of thousands of heavy clay tablets using a wedge-shaped script called cuneiform. When 19th century archaeologists like Austin Henry Layard began excavating the ruined cities of Nineveh and Nippur, they uncovered vast libraries of these tablets. And when scholars finally cracked the translation of the Sumerian language, they were stunned by what they read. The Sumerian creation epic, known as the Enuma Elish, describes a world where the gods descended from the sky to engineer mankind. The chief of the sky gods, the supreme authority of the heavens, was named Anu. His followers, the beings who came down to the earth, were known as the Anunnaki. According to the clay tablets, humanity became too noisy and chaotic, so the gods decided to wipe them out with a massive, catastrophic flood. But one god, Enki, took pity on a man named Ziusudra, warned him of the coming deluge, and instructed him to build a vessel to save the seed of humanity. Look at the parallels that immediately emerge. The Sumerian supreme sky god is Anu. The Hopi word for ant, the beings who saved them from the sky, is Anu. The Sumerian beings from the heavens are the Anunnaki. The Hopi phrase for ant friends is Anunnaki. The Sumerians tell of a great flood that wiped out a previous age of man, survived only by a chosen few who were warned by a higher being. The Hopi tell of the destruction of the third world by a great water, survived only by a chosen few who were warned and taken underground by the ant people. But the linguistic and mythological overlaps are only the beginning. The true collision between these two cultures lies in the sky. The Sumerians possessed an astronomical knowledge that defies all logical explanation for a Bronze Age people. They mapped the stars with a precision that modern astronomers can only verify using advanced telescopes. They understood the heliocentric nature of the solar system. They recorded the existence of outer planets that are completely invisible to the naked eye. And most inexplicably, they understood and calculated the phenomenon known as the precession of the equinoxes. Precession is the slow, continuous wobble of the Earth on its rotational axis. It is so incredibly slow that it takes approximately 25,920 years to complete a single cycle. To observe this shift in the night sky, a civilization would have to record the exact position of the stars for over 2,000 years, just to notice a 1-degree change. It is not something a single generation can discover. It is not something you notice while planting crops. It requires a massive, unbroken chain of mathematical records passed down across millennia. The Sumerians had this math. They knew the cycle. They recorded it on clay. And here is where the story stops being a series of interesting coincidences and becomes something far harder to explain away. Just like the Hopi, the civilizations of ancient Mesopotamia mirrored the stars on the ground. The ancient pyramids of Egypt, built in a cultural continuum that inherited much from the early Mesopotamians, are famously aligned with the three stars of Orion's belt, the exact same constellation that the Hopi mirrored with their three mesas in Arizona. Two cultures, separated by an impassable ocean, both obsessively focused on the same specific cluster of stars, both attributing their survival through a global cataclysm to beings associated with the name Anu, and both demonstrating a grasp of deep celestial mechanics that they theoretically should not have possessed. Every time investigators tried to close the case by calling it a random parallel, another piece of evidence pulled it back open. Because if you lay the Sumerian star charts next to the Hopi ceremonial calendars, the focal points align perfectly. Both cultures tracked the solstices and equinoxes with architectural precision. Both cultures structured their religious ceremonies around the heliacal rising of specific stars. How do you explain an identical cosmological framework existing simultaneously in the sands of the Middle East and the high deserts of North America, thousands of years before Christopher Columbus? The official academic explanation is simple, and for a long time, it satisfied most people who did not look too closely at the details. Mainstream anthropology and linguistics rely on a concept called independent invention, combined with human psychological archetypes. According to this view, the similarities between the Hopi and the Sumerians are entirely coincidental. Let us break down the skeptical argument fairly, because it is important. Skeptics argue that the word Anu is composed of fundamental, primary phonetic sounds. The letter A and the consonant N are some of the easiest sounds for the human vocal cords to produce. Therefore, it is statistically probable that two unrelated languages might independently assign these sounds to important concepts, like the sky or an ant. As for the flood myths, the academic consensus states that ancient human settlements always developed near large bodies of water or major river systems, like the Tigris and Euphrates, or the rivers of the American West. Rivers flood. Therefore, every ancient culture experienced catastrophic local flooding at some point, and over time, these local disasters were exaggerated into global mythologies. When it comes to the stars, the skeptical argument points out that the constellation of Orion is one of the brightest and most easily recognizable patterns in the night sky. It sits on the celestial equator, meaning it is visible from almost every inhabited part of the globe. If you are an ancient architect looking for a shape to map your cities against, 3 bright dots in a row is the most obvious choice. There is no need for transoceanic contact or lost civilizations. People just look up, see the same sky, and build similar things. If you stop the investigation there, the official explanation sounds reasonable. But there was something none of the skeptics had fully accounted for, and when someone finally looks beyond the surface generalizations, the whole case changes shape. The problem with the argument of independent invention is that it relies on ignoring the hyper-specific details. It is one thing to say that two cultures might both invent a story about a flood. It is entirely another thing to explain how both cultures specify that humanity was saved by beings associated with the exact same phonetic name, Anu, and that these beings possessed advanced knowledge of agriculture and survival. Furthermore, the astronomical knowledge possessed by these tribes cannot be dismissed as simple stargazing. To understand how impossible this is, we have to look outside the Hopi for a moment to another indigenous tribe that shares this same strange anomaly. In the African country of Mali lives the Dogon tribe. Like the Hopi, the Dogon possess an unbroken oral tradition spanning centuries. In the 1930s, French anthropologists studying the Dogon were shocked to discover that the tribe's holiest traditions centered around the star Sirius. But the Dogon did not just worship the bright star we can see. They explicitly stated that Sirius had a companion star, a tiny, incredibly dense, invisible star that orbited the main star every 50 years. They called it the Po-Tolo, and they drew its exact elliptical orbit in the sand. Modern astronomy did not photograph Sirius B, a white dwarf star that is completely invisible to the naked human eye, until the year 1970. The Dogon knew its exact orbital period, its exact density, and its exact trajectory long before modern telescopes could confirm it. When academics tried to explain this away, they suggested that some passing European astronomer in the 1920s must have told the tribe about Sirius B, and the tribe immediately incorporated it into their ancient, sacred religion. But anthropologists who deeply studied the Dogon rejected this. The knowledge of the companion star was woven into artifacts, masks, and ceremonies that were hundreds of years old. Now bring that context back to the Hopi and the Sumerians. You see the pattern. It is not just about drawing 3 dots on the ground. It is about a mathematical and astronomical precision that exceeds the capabilities of the tools supposedly available to them. The Hopi Kachina dances, which represent the spirits of the universe, are timed to astronomical alignments so precise that a deviation of a single degree would render the ceremony invalid. The Sumerian tablets record the distances between planets and the exact length of the solar year to a fraction of a decimal point, which leaves only 2 explanations. Either an extraordinary series of random coincidences and lucky phonetic guesses spanning continents and millennia, or the official timeline of human history is fundamentally broken. We are left with a civilization in the Middle East that mastered celestial mechanics and a civilization in the Americas that structured their entire survival around the exact same principles. And just when investigators thought they had reached the limit of the comparison, one more layer appeared that tied the 2 worlds together physically. Recent geological and climatological core samples taken from both North America and the Middle East have provided hard data about the end of the last ice age, a period known as the Younger Dryas, roughly 12,800 years ago. The physical evidence shows that this period was marked by sudden, catastrophic global changes. Massive melting of ice caps, sudden sea level rises, and extreme temperature fluctuations. A global cataclysm. The exact kind of destruction described in the Hopi story of the Third World and the Sumerian story of the Great Flood. Everything now points in one direction. The legend, the physical geography, the linguistic anomalies, and the deep geological record. They all agree. And the thing they agree on is the one thing mainstream history is most reluctant to accept. So what actually happened out there? After everything we have seen, the timelines, the translations, and the alignments, it is finally possible to see the shape of the answer. Not the simplified folklore, not the rigid academic denial, but the version that leaves almost no piece of evidence unaccounted for. The Hopi star maps and the Sumerian tablets do not align because aliens came down in spaceships and handed out dictionaries. And they do not align because of a lucky statistical coincidence. They align because they are 2 surviving fragments of the exact same broken mirror. The evidence points to the existence of a deeply ancient, highly advanced global culture of human observers that existed long before the cataclysm of the Younger Dryas. This was a civilization, or a connected network of human cultures that had already spent thousands of years tracking the stars. They had already calculated precession. They had already mapped the constellations. They had already developed a root language that included words like Anu to describe the heavens. When the cataclysm hit, the floods, the fires, the dramatic shifting of the Earth's climate, that global culture was shattered. The survivors were scattered across the face of the Earth. Some of them sought refuge in the high deserts of the Americas, retreating into caves and underground shelters to survive the changing atmosphere, guided by the elders they remembered as the Ant Friends. Over thousands of years, these survivors, the ancestors of the Hopi, chose to preserve the memory of that ancient knowledge not in stone, which can be broken, but in the unbreakable chain of human voice. They rebuilt their world as a reflection of the sky they had been taught to revere, laying out their mesas to match Orion. Meanwhile, on the other side of the planet, another group of survivors settled in the Fertile Crescent between the rivers. Over millennia, the descendants of these people eventually built cities like and Eridu. They took the fragmented memories of the old world, the sky gods, the ancient astronomers, the word Anu, and they pressed them into clay. They mythologized their ancestors into gods. The Anunnaki were not extraterrestrials. They were the memory of a human elite, the ancient star watchers from before the flood. elevated to divine status by the generations that followed. The legend of the Hopi and the report of the Sumerians were never in conflict. They were describing the exact same human epoch from two opposite ends of the earth. What connected them was real. Think back to the evidence, the matching phonetic names that no isolated cultures should share, the obsessive focus on the constellation of Orion, the calculation of cosmic cycles that take 26,000 years to complete, the identical narratives of survival through a global flood by going underground or building an ark. Each one of these facts, taken entirely alone, could be dismissed by a dedicated skeptic, but put together, they form a web of evidence that leaves almost no room for doubt. We cannot prove every last detail of how that ancient network operated, and we may never find the physical ruins of their central cities, crushed under the weight of glaciers or drowned beneath the rising oceans. But of every explanation ever offered, this is the only one that honors all three types of evidence: the physical science of the stars, the written documents of the ancient world, and the spoken memory of the indigenous people. And that is the quiet weight of it. This was never a story about primitive people blindly worshiping the dark. It is a story about ordinary human brilliance, powerful enough to calculate the turning of the galaxy, and resilient enough to survive the end of the world, carried across oceans and centuries in the minds of the survivors. But the answer is not really where this story ends, because what it tells us about ourselves is the part that lingers. We live in an age where we assume knowledge only moves in a straight line, always moving forward, always getting better. We look at a smartphone or a satellite and we believe we are at the absolute peak of human achievement. But the alignment of the Hopi and the Sumerians is quiet, undeniable proof that history does not work that way. Entire systems of science, refined over hundreds of generations, can vanish in a single geological heartbeat. The indigenous elders of the Americas were never telling fairy tales. They were holding the line. They were carrying an archive of human trauma and human triumph that the rest of the world had forgotten or buried. When we dismiss oral tradition because it is not stamped on a university document, we are not being rigorous. We are just being deaf. We lose the deepest parts of our own human story because we do not like the format it was saved in. Everything you know how to do, every piece of science or history you rely on, exists only because someone chose to pass it on. The moment the chain breaks, the moment people stop listening, it is gone. The three mesas of Arizona and the crushed clay tablets of Iraq are monuments to exactly that fragility. Remember the linguist we started with, sitting at the desk, looking at the word for the sky and the word for the ant? Look at that image again now. It is no longer just a strange academic anomaly. It is the echo of a human voice, shouting across 12,000 years of silence, proving that once, long ago, we all knew the same sky. So I want to ask you this. What knowledge do you think our modern world is quietly losing right now simply because we are too distracted to pass it on? Drop your answer in the comments. I read them, and the conversations under these videos are half the reason I make them. And if this is the kind of story you want more of, the history that the textbooks quietly skipped, the mysteries that still hold weight, then subscribe to the channel. That is the only way you will catch the next investigation, and I promise you, there are stranger archives waiting to be opened. If this journey kept you here to the end, leaving a like genuinely helps more people find the channel. That is not a small thing. It is the whole reason independent research like this can survive and keep digging. Thank you for staying with me all the way through. Keep looking at the stars and keep asking why the quiet places are quiet. I will see you in the next one.